This is Sarah with Posh Pooch Designs, and today's video I'm going to show you how to make my sweet baby blanket. It's a very simple pattern, and on this one I just used two colors, blue and yellow, to make a nice sweet blanket for a friend. Now this blanket can be made in any size, and I'll explain to you how to size it and how to do the repeats when we get a little bit farther. For today's demonstration, I'm going to be using the Baby Cakes yarn. And this is a new yarn from Karen. It comes with 3.5 ounces on each one. And to make the blanket, you're going to need about 7 ounces. So you need about 1.5 of these Karen Baby Cakes. The color that we're going to be using today is called Rosebud. And it has oranges and yellows and pinks and creams in it. It's really pretty. Now I've got this one torn apart so that my stripes line up. And I'll be talking about that also when we get to that point. So what you're going to need to make this sweet baby blanket is basically about 7 ounces of any worsted weight yarn. You can do it in stripes, or you can do it in solids or variegated. It's totally up to you. And it's a really, really easy pattern. It is a free pattern on my blog, and I'll put that blog link right down there in the notes underneath the video. So for today, we're going to be using our eye hook. And you can see that our eye hook is a 5.5 millimeter. You're also going to need a pair of scissors for clipping those yarns, and then you'll need a needle for weaving in those ends. And that's really all you need to make this beautiful, beautiful baby blanket. If you follow the pattern as written, you'll end up with a baby blanket that measures approximately 24 by 24 inches. To adjust the pattern, you'll need to stitch in increments of 3 plus 8. And that's because you'll have 4 double crochets at the beginning of each row and 4 double crochets at the end of each row. And then you'll need to do 3 chains for each shell. So you can begin this blanket in 2 ways. You can do the foundation double crochet, or you can chain and then stitch 1 double crochet in each chain. If you decide to do the foundation double crochet, you'll need to do 74 foundation double crochets. If you choose to chain, you're going to need to chain 77 chains and then begin stitching in the 4th chain from the hook, stitching 1 double crochet in each chain across. Now I'm going to begin with the foundation double crochet, and we do that by starting with our slip knot, and then we chain 4. We're going to begin stitching in the 4th chain from the hook. So we're going to yarn over, we're going to go in that 4th chain from the hook and pull up a loop. You'll have 3 loops on your hook. Yarn over and only go through the 1st chain, or the 1st loop, and that forms the 1st chain. Then we're going to yarn over and go through the next 2, yarn over and go through the next 2. And by doing that, we stitched a double crochet and a chain at the same time. Alright, so we're going to yarn over, we're going to go right in that chain that we made, pull up a loop, and yarn over and go through it. So we made the next chain. Yarn over and go through the next 2 loops, yarn over and go through the next 2 loops. So now we have 3 foundation double crochets. Yarn over, go through those chains that we made, pull up a loop, like we did previously, and then we finish our double crochet. So what we're doing is we're doing our chain and our double crochet at the same time. You'll need to stitch 74 foundation double crochets. If you decided to begin by chaining and double crochet, you'll need to chain 77 chains. I'm not going to chain 77 chains, but I am going to show you how to begin. So if I chained my 77 chains, I would begin by stitching in the 4th chain from the hook. So I would yarn over and I would go in that 4th chain from the hook. Those first 3 chains would count as my first double crochet, and then I would just place 1 double crochet in each chain across, making sure that I have 74 double crochets. Here is my foundation double crochet row that I have stitched 74 double crochets. Now if you chained the 77 and then started in the 4th chain from the hook, you should have 74 double crochets as well. Both beginning techniques work just fine. So to begin row 2, we're going to chain 3, and this chain 3 counts as our first double crochet. Now we're going to place 1 double crochet in the next 3 double crochets. So our chain 3 counted as our first double crochet. Then we put 1 double crochet in the next 3 double crochets. And now we're going to begin our shell stitches. So what we'll do is we're going to skip the next 2 double crochets and place 3 double crochets in that next stitch. And that's our first shell stitch. And we're going to repeat this all the way across this first row. So we'll skip the next 2 double crochets and place 3 double crochets in the next stitch. And like I said, we'll repeat this all the way across. Skip the next 2 double crochets and 3 double crochets in the next stitch. Now if you're following the pattern as written, you should get 22 shell stitches. If you added more chains, you'll get 1 more shell stitch for each of 3 that you added, because we want to add or subtract in increments of 3. So we began with the 4 double crochets at the beginning with the chain 3 counting as one of those double crochets. We skipped 2 stitches and we placed a shell stitch. And if you make this blanket according to the pattern, you will have 22 of these shell stitches going across. Now if you added or subtracted for size, for every 3 stitches you'll get an additional shell stitch. So I'm going to continue across stitching my shell stitches, skip the next 2 double crochets and 3 double crochets in the next stitch all the way across until we reach the end, and we're going to place 4 double crochets in the last 4 stitches. This is how row 2 should look with your shell stitches. When we get to the end of the row, this is our 22nd shell stitch, we're going to place 1 double crochet in each of those last 4 double crochets. And this is the way we will begin and end each row, with 4 double crochets. and then we're going to chain 3. And that's the end of row 2. Now for row 3, we have our chain 3 that counts as our first double crochet. And then we're going to place 1 double crochet in those next 3 double crochets, so we have a total of 4 double crochets at the beginning of this row. And like I said, that's how each row will begin and end, with 4 double crochets. Now, we're going to be stitching V-stitches in the center of each of the shell stitches. So we're going to skip this first double crochet of the shell stitch, and we're going to stitch a double crochet in the second double crochet, chain 1, and then double crochet in that same stitch. And that is a V-stitch. And we'll repeat this all the way across the row. So we'll go right to that second double crochet of the next shell stitch and stitch a double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. And we'll repeat this all across the row. Go to the next shell stitch, the second double crochet, and stitch double crochet, chain 1, and double crochet. Because we're following along the pattern of our shell stitches, we'll begin with the first 4 double crochets, and then we'll have 1 V-stitch in the top of each shell, so that we'll have 22 V-stitches, just like we had 22 shell stitches. And then when we get to the end of the row, we'll place our V-stitch in that last shell, and then we'll stitch 1, 2, 3, 4 double crochets at the end. All right, so let's get those V-stitches done. 1 V-stitch in the center stitch of each of our shells. And remember, your V-stitch is a double crochet, chain 1, double crochet. Here's our first 3 rows, our row of double crochets, our row of shells, and then our row of V-stitches. Now I put my last V-stitch in the top of my last shell, and I need to place 1 double crochet in each of those 4 double crochets. Now of course the chain 3 here counted as a double crochet, so we'll put a double crochet in the top of that also. So we've got 1, 2, 3, 4 double crochets to stitch at the end of the row. So there's our 4 double crochets. We're going to chain 3 and turn. All right, so the next row, we're going to again, the chain 3 counts as our first double crochet, and then we'll stitch 1 double crochet in the next 3 double crochets. And we're going to go back to stitching shell stitches. And what we'll do is we'll place the shell stitch in the chain 2 space of our V-stitch. So in that chain 2 space, we're going to stitch 3 double crochets. And this is the way this row will work all the way across. In each of our V-stitches, we'll stitch a shell stitch, which is 3 double crochets. We'll do this all the way across until we reach those last 4 double crochets, and we'll stitch 1 double crochet in each of the double crochets. And so our count doesn't ever change anymore after this. However many shells you have, it'll be the same throughout your project. If you added or subtracted chains to make it bigger or smaller at the beginning, your counts won't get any bigger or any different from here on out. If you started with 22 shells, you'll end with the same amount of stitches. So here we did our shell stitches in the V-stitch. Then we ended with our last 4 double crochets and chained 3. For the rest of the blanket, you will repeat the V-stitch row and the shell stitch row for as long as you want your blanket. If you're following the written pattern, you're going to repeat the V-stitch row and the shell stitch row for a total of 35 rows, and that's going to get you the 24-inch by 24-inch blanket. If you want it to be longer, just continue to repeat the V-stitch and the shell stitch row until you have the length that you want. So here is the blanket that I made using the Caron baby cakes. And you can see I alternated the V-stitch and the shell all the way for the total rows. Now I wanted to show you this one again because on this one I alternated colors. Now you can change colors every 2 rows if you want to, like on this one, or you can just use a variegated or a striping yarn like this one, or even do it in a solid. Now something that I discovered in using the Caron baby cakes, that when you end, you may not end on the color that you need, but you want to keep your colors going. And so I had to pull out the center portion of this next baby cake in order to continue on with this pinkish color and the cream, so that I didn't have an odd repeat. And you may need to do that. Line up your stripes if you're using a long striping yarn. All right, so once the rows are complete, you're just going to tie off at the top and weave in that end. And the next thing we need to do is the trim. Now we started with a double crochet row, and so what we're going to do is we're going to go over here on this side, because we already have the double crochet row here, and we're going to join right to this corner with our yarn. We'll chain 3, and what we're going to do is we're going to stitch a row of double crochet up the side of the blanket. Then we'll put 2 double crochets in the corner, and we'll stitch across the top. We'll put 2 double crochets in the next corner, and then we'll stitch down and meet to this end where the other end of the double crochet is. Now stitching a double crochet in the side of stitches can be a little bit tricky. And what I do is I try to go in a stitch itself and not a hole. Now there may be times where you'll have to go in a hole. And you want to try to put the same amount of stitches on each side. And I say roughly 74 because that's how many stitches that we put at the beginning, was 74 double crochets. And you want to try to keep it even. If you added an extra one or one less, it's not really going to hurt anything. But it's just something to kind of keep in mind so that you'll have a nice even amount of stitches. And sometimes you have to kind of eyeball it. If you think there's too much space, take it out and move it closer, because you want a nice even row of double crochets on the side. There we go. And I think if you pretty much work 2 double crochets on the side of each row, it'll come out relatively even. So I'm going to go ahead and stitch up this side, and then we'll get to the top. And when we get to the top up here, we'll have all these stitches to work in, and that row will make it nice and easy. I stitched a nice even row of double crochets along the side of my blanket. And now I'm at the top, and I want to place 2 double crochets in that corner, and that's just going to help it ease around that corner nice and neatly. And now the top part is going to be really easy because we're just going to place 1 double crochet in each stitch across. So across the top, we're just going to place 1 double crochet in each stitch across, and then place 2 double crochets in the corner again, so we have a nice rounded corner. I finished adding the trim down the last side. Now we don't go across the bottom because that's our beginning where we had our double crochet edge that we started with. So here's my last double crochet here on this last side. Now you can tie off here if you want to, but I like to add a little special trim. And it's just a chain 3 skip 2 trim. And so what I do is I just chain 3 and then I skip 2. Now this is a double crochet here, so I'm going to go right in that first stitch and just stitch a slip stitch. 1, 2, 3. I'm going to chain 3. I'm going to skip those next 2 double crochets and stitch a slip stitch. And this is just a little edge, just to give it a little bit of daintiness, or just a little edge of a ruffle that you can add. You don't have to add that. It's totally up to you. I just really like it. So I'm going to continue this on around all 4 sides of the blanket. And I did it on this one here. And I just think it adds a little extra, just a little extra daintiness or funness to the blanket, just to have that little extra ruffle. Now you don't have to add it, of course. I just really like it, like I said. I added the little chain edge on all 4 sides of my blanket. And then I joined back to the beginning place where I started the little chain edging. So I'm just going to take that last piece of yarn and weave that in so it stays put. And the real key to making sure that your ends stay put is to make sure that you go through some stitches and go one way and back the other. Try to go through stitches and not through holes if you can help it. And we'll go ahead and clip that off. So you can make the sweet baby blanket in a long striping yarn like the baby cakes that I have used. You can do it in a solid, or you can do it in a stripe like this one. It's a really easy pattern, very versatile, and I did really enjoy using this yarn, the Karen Baby Cakes. It is very soft, kind of reminds me of Red Heart, soft in its texture. So that is how you make the sweet baby blanket.